Well, a very good evening and welcome along to this edition of UlsterWhiskey.com, Irish Whiskey Reviews. We're live Saturday nights, 10 o'clock. What else would you be doing on a really wet, miserable Irish evening?
In
Well,
the
you
pub,
might.
in the pub, Justin.
You could be in the pub because the pubs are actually open. No, it's one of those massive shows this week. Do tell us, Marty, what we've got this week to give away.
Right. Well, I've been on to the good folk at Dunville's and Jarlath down there. What we're going to do is next week we are going to do a live tasting. Okay. What they're going to do is if people like and share tonight's show, we'll give you a bit of grace. So it's not just you don't have to do it live. So up until Monday morning, 20 people will be picked at random, and Dunville's will send out a miniature and a glass of the Three Crowns. Next week, then, we'll do a tasting. And if you go to ulsterwhiskey.com, you can download a tasting chart like this, and we'll go over that.
Right, fabulous, yeah.
So we can use that next week. And we'll do a tasting. So 20 people will get, 18 because me and you are getting one each. So, you have to go with
yeah, I like to hear that because I'm reduced to Tingbo this week. Look at that there. I'm reduced to that, you know.
I had draft Guinness yesterday for the first time in 15 weeks. I tell you, I felt like Popeye.
All right, okay. Now listen, if you can't get involved, if you aren't lucky enough, this is where you can get the whiskey from dunvilleswhiskey.com. Yeah. So that's a really great coup for this. We're only a couple of months in, and already we've got a nice more or less giveaway for people. That's a nice thing to get for. We're sort of out of lockdown now to try it to see if we can cope with things, and let's hope we can.
Managing to get to the pub just for a draft. This is a tin of Guinness, and don't worry, I've poured it into a glass. See if anybody, people getting at me. But draft Guinness is just it's so much nicer, so much nicer. Anyway.
So this week's topic is going to be a wee bit different. I mean, I didn't think to myself that fire could be so interesting, but you've sent me through a dozen stills from this about fire, and I'm thinking to myself, what on earth is that all about? Fire.
Well, I feel like the crazy world of Arthur Brown, dun, fire. Unfortunately, we're not allowed to play that thing anymore. But no, fire and heat. I'll put if I'd have put that in the title, it wouldn't have necessarily been as good. So it's fire and heat, and how you'll see once I start talking about it. There's four sort of topics that we'll talk about, and it's to do with fire and combustion and heat and stuff. Okay, it's all to do with the manufacturing of whiskey.
Okay, so how does fire manage to make much of a difference to a whiskey? Because obviously there's no direct heat put on the whiskey whatsoever nowadays, is there really?
Well, yes. The first thing I'll talk about is peat. Okay, and how Pete?
I've never met Pete. Who is he?
He's Pete Burns. He's a guy. he's a very old dude. He's a very old guy. Now, we over here are very used to peat, and you've just put up a graphic of it there. Peat is basically partially decomposed vegetation. Lots of it's sphagnum moss. And what happens is, over thousands of years, it partially decomposes. It goes into what's known as an anaerobic environment, which means oxygen isn't there, so it doesn't decompose totally. And that's really the process. Eventually, it would lead to becoming coal. But most people are used to the likes of Scotch whiskies, which are peated. Okay?
Okay.
Now, what happens in that process is that they malt the barley. They get the barley to partially grow, if you like, to sprout, and then they dry it out using peat. Okay. Now, when they dry it out, they take it down from being quite moist, obviously, down to around 15% is the moisture content, and after that, then they don't use the peat to dry it, and that stops the process of germination, essentially. But it puts in flavour compounds into the barley. Okay.
Okay.
Now, there are various types of peat depending on where they're from and the level of decay. Now, over on Islay, which again, I'm using Lefroy because it's very, very heavily peated. Okay. And over there, lots of it comes from the Castle Hill peat bog, which is a huge peat bog on Islay. Now, the reason they used it would have been back in the day. That's the only source of fuel really that these people would have had. You know, they went out with their spades, dug it out, and used that to as fuel to fire stuff, etc., etc. So it gives it this smoky compounds and various phenolic, as it's known, phenols into the barley, and then that's then used to make the whiskey, and it gives it this smoky, medicinal, fairly complex chemical taste. You know, so it's really it's seen very much as a Scottish thing, but it probably would have been quite common over here for a period of time until people would have it was the fuel that everybody used, and there's up until today there's still people who use it. Now, as I say, different types of peat give different flavours, and one of them is Cologne down in County Down. They have their own. I say it's a smoke house. It's really a smoke shed. If you've seen Cologne, it's really quite a small place. Brendan, yeah, that's the Cologne distillery. Brendan down there, he says that the peat that he gets from Donegal is quite light, and it gives him an aromatic, smoky flavour, obviously, but it's quite a light smoke. The stuff he uses from County Down is a much more, almost like coal. It's quite dense. It's a lot darker, and it gives a much heavier sort of compound flavour to it. So, again, all of this will play a part in what eventually you'll end up with. You know, now lots of people think that peat only gives that smoky flavour. Not really. There's a huge range of very variable range of flavours in regard to, you could have cloves, you could have medicinal, that sort of TCP flavour will come in. Coffee, licorice. You don't understand those kind of.
Okay, yeah, I'm with you. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's what peat brings to the table, if you like. So it is that very heavy. It adds a real body to the flavour, to the whiskey. So if you ever drink something like Lefroy, there's other ones, Ardbeg, Kalila, and various other ones. They have this really smoky bonfire taste. You know, you can smell it a mile away. Okay. Now, interestingly, it's measured in parts per million. Phenol parts per million is really how it's measured. And Lefroy is very smoky. It'll be in and around 40 to 45 parts per million. The human body is quite good at picking up these scents, these tastes. So it doesn't have to have a huge amount. But the biggest is actually there's another Islay distillery, Bruichladdich, who don't peat their basic product, but they bring out the heaviest peated whiskey you can get, up to more, and it's about 160, 170 parts per million, which is huge.
That's pretty impressive. So basically, what you're saying is the human body's a smoke detector.
Could be, yes, and it needs pressed every Monday.
Now listen, we've got some comedians on tonight. If you're watching the show, remember to watch and interact on the facebook.com/Irish Whisky Review /live. That way we can see your posts and interact with us as well, and we can see you, because if you've previously set it, you're doing it elsewhere, we can't see it. So we've got a lot of people on tonight spreading the word around. We've got Pete McCabe saying to Alistair Bell, who says he's busy on a Zoom meeting at this time of night. You'll have to watch it and replay and enter the Dunvilles giveaway before Monday morning. Peter McCabe is saying, Mr. Popular, you can always watch it in playback. You're right, Peter, you can. Gary McCallum's tagging his friend Phil Patterson. Okay. Make sure you like and comment and share it yourself. Patrick O'Connor is saying, it's the highlight of my week. Great job, guys. Stanley Sung is mentioning Gary Arthur as well. Pete McCabe is saying, clearly the barbers have reopened in County Antrim.
No, the Corona Cup. Yes. I have members.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Okay, why use 3 Crowns and VR?
why use 3 Crowns? Well, the thing is, 3 Crowns is very interesting whiskey. It's quite light and summery, is normally how I view it. Also, there's lots of people reviewing whiskies, and what they do is they review some of the more elite ones, some of the more expensive ones. And I'd like to do ones where people can jump in and actually go and purchase them. A bottle of 3 Crowns is a little over £30. So you buy it and you can join in. You don't have to spend £300 on like the Cortado bottles or the rum cast, the port rum cast finishes. So make it a bit more accessible for people.
So let's get back to fire, because we're nearly a quarter of the way through the show tonight already. 15 minutes in. I can't even add up an hour. Is an hour made up of 15 minutes? No, it's made up of 4. Oh, I can't divide. Yeah.
It is, Justin. You're not being an example for the educational system in Northern Ireland here.
No, I am. I went to grammar school, but I forgot how to add up, because the computer does it for you, So spreadsheets usually do it for me. You're right. It is a quarter of an hour is 15 minutes. Yeah, that's right. It is as bad. That I call it the lockdown effect, Marty. It's a lockdown effect. I don't know whether I'm coming or going some ways. So we're back. We're going to get an education tonight. I mean, we really are going to get an education tonight. I don't even know whether I should put this in the screen or not, because people might just log off as soon as I do this. What does this thing mean?
Now, this is basically showing you a chemical reaction that's called the Maillard effect. Okay. Now, I don't want to scare anybody off. And what I'm going to talk about now is how they fire the stills. Okay. Back in the day, all stills would have been fired with either coal, wood, or peat. And that's what I mean to that is when they boil up the still. Okay. This would have been just de rigueur. There was nothing else no other way of doing it. But along came steam heating. And basically what it is, if you ever look inside most, not all, most stills these days, what they have at the bottom is coils. And these coils are steam heated. Now it's much more efficient, it's easier to control, etc., etc. And that boils boils the liquid inside. Now, as I say, all of the distilleries really changed over. The vast majority of them changed over to this style of heating. But there are some who still use direct fire. And the reason for that is this Maillard effect. Now, Maillard effect, or reaction, or whatever you want to call it, was discovered by a French chemist way back in 1912. And it's basically the reaction between amino acids and sugars and stuff in food and that kind of thing. You take chicken, you can boil chicken, and it's totally tasteless. It's horrible. But you roast it, and it goes slightly brown on the outside, and you get this much better flavor compounds. You get much better. It's almost, just the amount of chemicals that are released, and it's slightly different than caramelization, but it's in the same ballpark. It's roughly the same thing.
Is this like when you get a steak that's seared?
Exactly the same process. That's why people will sear a steak and it cooks on the outside, and it gives these totally different flavor compounds. Now, there is a cooking process these days that people use, it basically boil in the bag. It's called sous vide. And a lot of the big restaurants will use it. What they do is they put meat and stuff into a bag, they then put it into hot water and just heat it through. Okay? Just it heats through. Then whenever it's cooked, they bring it out and then sear it. It's kind of a reverse of what normally happens. But the reason they sear it is because these flavor compounds are then accessible. The amino acids and the sugars and stuff break down into many, many different chemicals. And I mean, obviously, I'm not a chemist, so I couldn't go through that. But you can. This is the process. This is what it does. It really is. It's really what gives flavor to food, okay, and drink. Now, there are still some distilleries that use this direct fire method, okay? The reason being, they think it gives a better taste, okay? Now, the reason I have this rather wonderful substance, okay, is this is from Killowen, okay? Now, this is poaching. And poaching, as we all know, poaching in some ways can be unaged whiskey, okay? It's just not.
Is that made in these stills here we can see on screen at the minute, or similar to them? Yeah.
Made in those wonderful little stills down there. Honestly, Killowen Distillery, if you've just seen how small Killowen Distillery is, it's utterly tiny. It's like they're like two large kettles.
It's small but perfectly formed is basically what you're saying.
Perfectly formed and absolutely a wonderful setup. This poaching, I wish if you could smell this. This is a fantastic substance. It really is. It's perfectly drinkable at 48%. Brendan down there, he's a big believer in this Maillard effect. He thinks, and as do lots of other people, that the direct fire adds to the flavour compounds. One of the problems with it is, however, there are little bits in the wash whenever it comes in, and once you put the direct flame on, they burn. So they have what's called a rummager. It goes around and it sort of scrapes the bottom of the thing to keep it stirring and keep it moving. The Japanese are big fans of this as well. The Japanese distilleries, lots of them opened up, and by the time they opened up in sort of the mid 20th century, a wee bit later than that, steam was de rigueur, and they put in steam heating. They then took them out to add in direct fire. Now, most of these direct fires are gas. That's what Brendan uses down in Killowen. They use gas because obviously it's easier to control. the coal is a bit harder. Now, this is probably the best poaching I've ever tasted. I really, really rate this stuff. And if this is an indication of what the whiskey's going to be like, their own whiskey supply, this is fabulous stuff. Fabulous.
Here we've got to show some of the comments. Some of the comments we can't show tonight because they're very, very bad. Just remember that we are both from Northern Ireland when you're making comments. That's what I would say. Okay, all right. I don't know who you are. I don't know where you live, but I could find you if I could be bothered, and I might do something to you. All right. So there you go. Let me see. Michael Matthews is saying. The poaching I had with my dad 40 years ago was probably a week old. It was terrible tack.
Yes. There's this common story of some old wizened man making poaching in the side of a glen in County Antrim. Mickey McElhatton's poaching was the most wonderful stuff you ever tasted. Most of the poaching that you would get. Not that I've ever touched any of the illegal poaching.
No, not that it needed to have a brandy ball in it to make it palatable or anything like that. There, no.
What the idea that something that's made in an old milk churn versus something that's made in copper pot stills by people who actually know what they're doing. I know which one I prefer. I have tried some of the illicit poaching. Trust me, this stuff's much, much better. You can drink that. This is perfectly palatable. It's lovely. Really nice.
Listen, Julie's been asking, what are some of the brands that use these fire-heated stills?
Well,
she's mentioning Bruichladdich.
Bruichladdich?
Yeah.
No, Bruichladdich doesn't use them. Macallan have some, Glenfiddich, and the best of the lot, Springbank. Springbank uses direct fire. Interestingly, when Brendan was setting up Cologne, under EU law, he wouldn't have been allowed to on the Irish whiskey thing, the Irish whiskey demographic or parameters. But because he's in the UK and Springbank and Glenfiddich and the Scotch whiskies are doing it, he was able to set it up as a direct fire. So he uses gas down there. And honestly, it's fabulous. Now, just whenever I'm saying that, Cologne this week, and I have ordered a bottle, but it hasn't arrived yet. Cologne have brought out this week an Islay peated cask finish whiskey, single cask, which is it'll be interesting to find out what that's like. He wasn't able to tell me which distillery he got his cask from, but on the tasting notes I could probably hazard a guess, but I'm not going to in case I'm totally wrong.
Are some of these things industrial secrets, Marty? Are they? Can you taste the difference? Can people taste the difference sometimes?
You can. There's lots of I don't say smoke and mirrors, but it's the same as everything else. There's lots of companies that will do things and sell bits and pieces to other distilleries or other companies, bonders, and they just don't want their name associated with it. It's not that they want their name associated with it; they just don't want to undermine their own product, if you know what I mean.
I understand. It's like they don't want to say that we make cornflakes for anybody else, sort of thing. Yeah,
it's exactly the same. I mean, every factory that makes like televisions, there's like a generic factory that makes TVs for Sony and Samsung and LG and so on and so forth. Yeah. And the only real difference is the sort of quality control. That's pretty much the only thing.
Well, we're getting lots of people involved tonight. This seems to have captured people's imagination tonight. There is John Donnelly is saying there, picked up some Brendan's poaching literally 10 minutes ago from the vineyard. Looking forward to tasting it now. Would that be a good choice, would it? Yeah,
absolutely. Honestly, I'd be get it cracked open. You've half an hour to try it and let me know what you think. I think it's really, really good. It's really got a nice sweet. There is a licorice flavor to it. There's a heathery stuff to it. It's really good, really, really good. Honestly, I recommend. pretty much everything that these guys have done so far, I would wholeheartedly recommend. I think they're going to be fantastic.
Jonathan McCulloch is saying the same. He's saying Kilo and Distillery. What do they use, and what is their whiskey like, Marty? There you go. More endorsements there.
Yeah, brought out 4 different experimental cask finishes, and what their distillery, they haven't aged enough. They haven't had 3 years to age their whiskey yet. So what they're doing is they've bought in whiskey from other sources and are finishing it in experimental casks. The last one they brought out was a tequila cask, an oak cask that previously had tequila in it, and then obviously the tequila somebody else has drunk it, and then they've put the whiskey in to fill it up, and they're selling single casks of this. It's the thing is, you probably, some of them are going to be fabulous, some of them are maybe not so good, and some of them you probably don't like, but they're finished in different casks, and the way they do it is really, really good. It's basically lifted straight from the cask straight into the bottle. There's no colouring at it, there's no water added to it, nothing. Probably the most interesting one, which I talked about a couple of weeks ago when we were talking about water, was the Chicalina one. It's really, really strong. It needs a fair few teaspoons of water, but it's a white wine cask finished Irish whiskey. It's really good. It's interesting, really.
Oh, okay, you're wetting my taste buds here, and that's just fortuitous because next week we are doing something a wee bit different, and you can get involved by basically liking, commenting, and sharing this broadcast. We're going to select, I think, up to 18 people by random because we obviously were doing it ourselves. So we're going to then get in touch with you. And in time for next week, we're going to have a little surprise delivered. Marty, tell us more.
Yes, Dunvilles are going to send out a miniature of 3 crowns. And I think they're sending out a glass as well, and it'll come in a little bag. Then what we'll do is we'll do a live tasting, and if anyone wants to join in that doesn't get a miniature, what they do is go on to dunvilleswhiskey.com, go to the shop and buy a bottle, and then they can join in and have a bit of fun with this as well. Because whenever we're doing this, I've people telling me that I'm he's a connoisseur of whiskey. I'm a keen amateur, I like what I like, and it's interesting to hear other people's point of view.
I think you know what you're talking about, Marty. I think you're more than a keen amateur, and a lot of people on here think the same as well. Now, back, we're about halfway through the show tonight again. I don't know where the time goes because I've obviously got to watch the clock, and we're coming up on the 29-minute mark tonight already, halfway through the show. Remember to like, comment, and share if you want to get involved, and comment on the main page as well, which is this page, because otherwise you can't actually see comments on screen. If you actually do that, as simple as that, comment on that main Irish Whiskey Review / live page. So there we go. Now back to the show. We're talking about fire this week, Marty. I never thought fire could affect it so much, but fire is a bit like water. There's many ways the fire can interact with the product.
Yes. Now, we're going to go on to probably the main aspect of fire on whiskey, and that's actually the charring of casks. Okay? Now, what happens is when a cooper builds a cask,
they don't really do this, Marty, do they?
Yes, they do. Now,
wow.
They burn the casks. Now, how did that come about? How did anybody know to do this? Well, what happened, they think, is that barrels, you have to remember, back in the day, barrels were used to transport everything, not just liquids, but they were used to transport solids as well. What they would have done is possibly put salted fish in barrels, etc., etc. Now, if you transport fish in a barrel, it obviously leaves a taste, or and you're not going to fill it with.
Never, Marty. It wouldn't do that, would it?
But what happens is then, obviously, if you want to fill that with beer or whiskey or whatever you want to fill it with, it's going to leave that taste. So what they discovered was that if you burn the inside of them, that gets rid of the taste, but it also had an effect on the whiskey. The charcoal that they created, it's basically like, whenever you buy a fish tank and you get a charcoal filter, and it filters out impurities, it filters out some of the sulfur compounds, it filters out some of the nastier things that you don't particularly like.
Yes, a lot of things for the car and for those face masks that we all have to wear now for, the COVID-19 have got carbon in them.
Lots of them will have carbon. Now, the picture you're putting up there now, that's a very, very deep char. Now, there's lots of different levels of char. You can actually go from toasted, and what they do is that then they sort of lightly toast the inside of it, and that brings out certain chemical compounds and flavour profiles and stuff to the whiskey at that point. However, if you do it once, you can do it again, and what they'll do is they'll you can have a toasted cask, then burn it for a much longer period of time, and that'll give many more. It'll release more chemicals out of the wood, and it'll give much more flavour, and again more charcoal again, and it gives it another life. Now you're showing their staves going from really sort of quite light all the way through to dark. Now, they have to be slightly careful on the way that they do this, obviously. So they don't burn it for very long. The depth of char can be, on the surface, it can look not too bad, and then it doesn't burn too far into the wood. But you can reuse casks. It would surprise people just how long a cask actually lasts.
How do they actually set fire to it? Do they use alcohol itself to start the fire?
No, I think they fire it in the gas, as far as I know. I think there's different people who use different methods, but it's basically used by gas. But that level of char there is known as alligator or crocodile char, because it looks like alligator.
All right, that's my favorite. I like alligator pears. I like avocados.
No. So again, one of the things is, by law, bourbon, they have to use charred American white oak casks. So Quercus alba, as that's the Latin name. See, a bit of educational stuff here.
Marty, I got 88% in my last Latin exam.
Whenever I learned Latin, all I ever learned was that some guy called Sextus used to sit below a tree. Sextus sub arbore sedent. That's all I ever remember.
I knew you went to Cambridge House, Marty. I knew you went to Cambridge House.
Mm-hmm. Fine establishment, fine educational establishment it was. But so bourbon casks have to be charred. Okay? So they have to be charred, and they can only be used once. So what happens is they use them once, and then they sell them. And lots and lots and lots of the distilleries buy these up. Now, I remember the last time I looked at the price of an ex-bourbon cask, I think they are about £150 each for an ex-bourbon cask. So
you wouldn't be making a garden seat out of it?
Well, no. But they're really valuable to the likes of the Scotch whisky industry, to the Irish whisky industry, etc., because they can buy up these casks, which they do, and then bring them across, and then they reuse them. Because you can use a cask in Scotland or Ireland many times, and often it might surprise people just how long some of these casks actually can hang about. There was a cider producer in Armagh, and I was down at 2 years ago, year and a half ago, something like that. When they went down and they had these casks that they were aging apple cider in. What had happened was they knew that this orchard had sold casks to Bushmills many years ago. So they wanted to buy ex-whiskey casks from Bushmills. Now, there's a 35-year gap between the two of these. But when they went to Bushmills and said, "Oh, can we buy a couple of ex-casks from you?" Bushmills actually said to them, "We still have the casks that you give us." They had been reusing them. Some of these casks hang about for, 50 years. It's surprising.
And so there's a real big providence in this, really, then, as well, isn't there?
It surprised people just how long some of these casks can hang about. And sometimes they overdo them. They keep them a bit too long. Occasionally, you'll get some whiskies where you get that kind of astringent,
woody taste.
It even goes beyond that. If you remember whenever you were a kid, you would have chewed on a stick or something. You'd have done that kind of stuff.
You mean on a lollipop stick?
Not even that. Even just like a silly old, whenever you chew it, you get that astringent, nasty sort of taste. It's quite bitter. If they keep a whiskey in a cask too long, they can. That's what comes in. It comes in those sort of nasty green flavors that really aren't that. So again, it comes down to a blender. A blender they'll know when a cask, right? That's it. That's cask's done. Again, when a guy who's bringing out a whiskey, they'll go to a distillery, established distillery, and say, a bonder will say, "I want to go," and they'll go around a few casks and say, "That's the one we want. That's the one we want." And it's to do with this sort of aging and so on and so forth.
Now, the questions are coming thick and fast this week. We'll try and get through them as we go along this week, because otherwise we'll have to do them in the last 4 or 5 minutes, and it's too much to do. So we've been asked by Frank Heron, off-the-wall question, but has anyone ever used an old Guinness cask for whiskey?
Well, I can't say for definite, but there's lots of stout cask finished whiskies about now. Jameson cask mates, stout finished. I doubt if Guinness are going to be giving those or selling those away, selling those off. But there are stout cask finished whiskies now. Jameson, as I say, is probably the easiest, most accessible
and not just in Ireland, Scotch ones as well. Yeah,
there is. There's a few of those as well. Lots of people now are trying to find different cask finishes, things that have been in it before. Then they have them and give them out, or they sell them on. So you'll start to find a lot of the independent brewers. I mean, there's lots of now real ales and all these new breweries sending out, and they'll be doing wood cask finishes. So you'll start to see the distilleries buying those up, especially if they can turn around and say that it's a successful brand. They can turn around and say, I don't know, Belfast Brewery or the Boundary Brewery or whatever.
If it catches the imagination. Paul saying hello tonight. There he is. There 19 days to go. Yes, do we need to mention that tonight again as well? We do.
Belfast Whisky Week. Paul O'Kane doing this wonderful thing that he's doing. Biggest whiskey festival in Ireland, and he is running the show. I'm going to be presenting. I'll give more details on that as and when a bit more necessary.
Because we're still a month away from it, really, aren't we? Yes, yeah.
Pretty much, about three and a bit weeks. If you want to get on board with, there's lots and lots and lots of online events. So get on that, and yeah.
And he's actually saying that we have a Buckfast cast.
Yes. It's a Buckfast cast. It's sad. I don't even want to. Yeah. Yeah. He is a whiskey finished in a Buckfast cask. I don't want to really say a huge amount about that.
Listen, there's nothing wrong with that. If you're hanging around Craigavon, Portadown, Lurgan way, and you want to have a Buckfast, like, who am I to stop you? Who am I to...
Exactly. You want to indulge in some domestic violence and
No, you're a desperate man, Marty. Desperate man. Now, let me see. What else has been said tonight? Somebody else has mentioned the coffee. They're going for a Belfast coffee. Potchin is amazing, so easy to drink, neat. Agree on the heather that you were mentioning earlier, almost syrupy, but going for a Belfast coffee next is John J. Yep.
Belfast coffee is basically an Irish coffee made with potchin. That's the difference. Belfast is a bit more hardcore, put potchin in
it. Yeah. Oh, don't start. Don't start me. Listen, there's Connor Farrell. Connor, I wish you'd change your name, because every time you comment, I think it's Colin Farrell, and I'm thinking, we're landing Hollywood, here we come. But no such luck, Connor. There's Paul. He's saying it's a great chat tonight. We've still got 20 minutes left, Paul.
Still got 20.
And we haven't got to the best part of fire where we get to burn things, Marty. This is the bit I like.
Arson. No, I'll just finish off, because I think it's important to tell people about the char. What flavors it brings into play. The charring brings out a number of different chemicals. And I know this sounds like a bit of a chemistry lesson tonight, but lactones they bring out fruity flavors. They bring out coconut, sometimes cheese, dairy products, hay, grass, all of it. This is where all these different flavors come in, and people will go, I get hay off that, or I get I smell like it smells like buttermilk or something along those lines. That's where it comes in, and you'll perceive it slightly different than I would. And people think, well, how can you smell hay and somebody smell and cheese? The chemicals aren't that dissimilar. So it comes down to sort of personal points of reference, essentially. It's how people feel comfortable with them, if you know what I mean. Another one that they bring out is vanillin. And vanillin, a lot of people don't know that artificial vanilla, actually comes mostly from oak wood. And that's where they get that. It doesn't come from vanilla pods. It comes from, it's synthesized. It's that chemical, vanillin. So lots of whiskies will have that vanilla nose to them, or vanilla taste, and that's where it comes from. And another one really interesting is the tannins. Tannins, if you ever have tea or red wine, that where it sort of sticks. Do you know what I mean? That sort of sticky thing in your mouth.
Yeah.
It adds that sort of dryness to it, and a really sort of heavily charred cask can give it a real tannin. Now, it breaks down other chemicals to give other flavour compounds. It doesn't really taste of anything itself, but it breaks down other chemicals to release other flavours, and that's how all this really, really complex chemistry comes from the charred cask,
Okay. Now, talking about the stout cask, I didn't mention this guy earlier. Walsh's Coffee Stout cask, Dick Mack's bottle, is mighty. I'm not familiar with that one, Marty. Are you? Yeah.
Yep. Super. As I say, all of these different cask finishes. There's so many different whiskies about at the minute. It's hard to keep up, to be fair, but it's really, really interesting. It's really interesting.
Now, this week's topic, of course, is fire, and we're getting on to the good part, because I seen, like, basically, we didn't start the fire; it was always burning. The world is turning.
Yeah.
What is this? This is a picture of a distillery on fire.
Yes. The problem is, if alcohol is combustible, okay, and if you have wooden barrels filled with flammable liquid, is very, very easy to catch fire. Okay?
Okay, yeah.
And it might surprise you just how common it is even today with distillery fires. In Kentucky, there was 5 distillery fires within the last 20 years. Okay?
Right. Okay.
I think the one you're showing there is the one at Jim Beam, where 45,000 barrels of whiskey went up in flames.
No, that's the Heaven Hill one. That's the Heaven.
Right.
That's the Heaven Hill one. This actually is the Jim Beam one. All right.
Yes. Yeah. So if a barrel of whiskey catches, yeah,
that's a big fire,
and it's extremely hard to put out. Okay. These would have been very common. The late great Jonathan Barden, in his book *The Plantation of Ulster*, wrote that in the year 1600, Newry, which not far from where Cologne is, burnt down after a distiller started a fire. You're using a chemical liquid, a flammable liquid, I'm going to say, sorry, storing it in wooden casks, so it caught fire and basically just burnt down most of Newry. And a guy called Alistair Bagnall, he inherited Newry at the time and had to rebuild essentially the whole place. But they're extremely common.
So that's what it would have looked like if we had a picture of that.
Yeah.
That's the Dublin fire.
That's the Dublin fire. Now I'll get to the Dublin fire because it's interesting in its own right. You had the first ever. This is a little quirk. It's not really. It is kind of distillery related, but not really. Tullamore in Ireland was the scene of the first ever air disaster. Okay, a hot air balloon in 1785 was taking off from the centre of the town. It got caught on the side of one of the houses and tipped over and set fire to a row of houses. Now, they all rushed out and they managed to get it set.
Now, Marty, you're spoofing us along here. The Americans watching tonight are thinking, this guy's telling us a tall story.
No. Now, to commemorate this, Tullamore brought out a limited edition Tullamore Dew Phoenix cask. So people think, this is maybe something to do with Phoenix Park or this kind of thing, or the Irish Fionuska, which means clear water. It's not. It's to do with the very first ever air disaster that happened in Tullamore, way back when.
And hence the logo, the Phoenix Tullamore there as well, yeah?
Yeah, the Phoenix, that's it. It's to represent that the Phoenix is the symbol of Tullamore, the town, and they brought that in commemoration. So I thought that was a nice thing. It's interesting they put that in.
It is. It certainly directly relates to fire as well. Now, what else? What else have we got to do this week? Because we've only got about 10 minutes or so left, and we've got a couple of other things to cover.
Kilbeggan. There was a fire in Kilbeggan in 1878. Bush Mills had their own fire in 1885, which basically destroyed pretty much all of the distillery. There was a fire in Derry, the Watts Distillery. The Watts Distillery was over in Abbey Street. They actually had 2 fires. There was one in 1894, and then in 1915 they had a huge fire over in Abbey Street, which is over on the bog side. What happens when these fires happen? They basically break the casks open to stop them catching fire, and the whiskey runs down the street. Now, this is where
yum.
This is where the great Dublin whiskey fire of 1875 comes into play. Okay.
Oh boy.
What happened was over in Chambers Street, which is not far away from the Teeling Distillery these days, over in the Liberties in Dublin, a fire broke out, and there was 4,000 casks in this warehouse. Now, at the time, let's say the 1875, it was fairly common for people to keep animals. Okay, and the first thing that alerted them was a pig squealing. Okay, so there's now an Irish whiskey called Flaming Pig, which, yes, it's
oh boy! I mean that links into Michael Matthews saying the truth is stranger than fiction. Fair play, Marty.
now this fire was the head of the fire department at the time was a man called James Ingram, and he had worked in New York, and he remembered that whiskey actually floats on top of water. Okay, alcohol floats on top of water, so there's no point in firing water on top of this thing because you just send it into a bigger conflagration. So what he did was they got them to rip up the paving stones and throw gravel and sand and manure, funnily enough, on it, and it managed to divert this river of flames. Now, anyone who knows anything about knows that there's alcohol flowing down the street. It's kind of like a dream come true for lots of people.
Oh boy!
What happened was people started filling buckets, mop buckets, etc., etc., etc. Now I have a reading from the Illustrated Times of London. Now I'm going to read this out to you. This is a news report. Crowds of people assembled and took off their hats and boots to collect whiskey, which ran in streams along the streets. 4 persons have died in the hospital from the effects of drinking the whiskey, which was burning hot as it flowed. 2 corn porters named Healy and McNulty were found in a lane off Cork Street, lying insensible with their boots off, which they had evidently used to collect the liquor. There are many other persons in the hospital who are suffering from the same cause. 2 boys are reported to be dying, and it is feared that others will follow. So these 2 guys took off their shoes, took off their boots to fill it with whiskey and drink it. 13 people perished in that awful tragedy, and all of them from alcohol poisoning. Not a single person died in the fire. Every one of them died of alcohol poisoning.
Here's Connor saying those dubs would drink anything. I hope you're from Dublin, Connor. Otherwise, we'll be in bother from the thought police. There you go. And listen, we've got 8 minutes left tonight. What have we not covered, Marty, that we need to cover?
I don't think we've much more to cover. One of the things I would say is that the whiskey fires are much more common. Now, if you ever get a chance to go to Middleton, where Jameson and nearly all of Irish, the bulk of Irish whiskey is produced, they have, I think, on site 25 warehouses with 36,000 barrels of whiskey in each of them. So as you can imagine, the fire precautions are extremely stringent, but it doesn't take a huge amount. The primary cause of distillery fires these days, back in the day, it would have been guys smoking, somebody having a cigarette, and people used to do this sort of stuff.
Let me guess, the high energy sparking for mobile phones. Nope.
Lightning. Nearly all of the warehouses now have lightning rods and this kind of stuff to stop. All it takes is one bolt to hit the cask, and boom, up they go. It is extremely dangerous. I don't think people realise or maybe appreciate just how dangerous a lot of this stuff is. So as I say, there was 20 distillery or 5 distillery fires in 20 years over in Kentucky, and hopefully there'll be no more. But when the world's biggest bourbon brand, Jim Beam, can lose 45,000 barrels, it kind of shows you just how dangerous it can be,
Yes, certainly stuff. So we're about to wrap up tonight. We've got about 5 minutes left tonight. If you want to ask any questions that are there, you will need to get in touch with us. Remember to comment, like, and share, and we'll just recap on the Dunville's thing for next week. Now, if you do want to join our mailing list, this is how to go about it. It is a long gobbledygook link. There is a shorter version, but if you click that link in the comments, which are down below us here, okay, you'll be able to join the mailing list, and Marty will eventually get round to type something up and send it out to you. We'll probably do that in the next couple of weeks or so. And where do you hear this one? Where do you hear this one? This is unbelievable, right? Now, I don't know whether you can see this or not, right? It says, the people of Slane learned to swim after a full articulate lorry full of Jamesons got tipped into the Boyne at the bridge. Carnage happened, but the locals were very happy for a couple of weeks. That sounds like Whiskey Galore, the Irish version, doesn't it?
But like this, I can't swim. I've never seen the point, to be honest. I've never seen the point of swimming. But I would learn to swim if there was free whiskey involved.
Do not go swimming in any river after barrels, because they're very heavy to lift.
There's there's a dream sequence there, Justin. You know that bit in Trainspotting where Ewan McGregor's swimming through the ocean. He's actually heading down the toilet. You know what I mean?
I know. Here's Trevor saying, thanks again. Great subject this week. Yeah, it certainly is a great subject this week. And then we have got another fantastic show tonight. Thank you, Marty and Justin. Michael Matthews saying, well done. Enjoy the show.
Thanks, Matthew.
Here's a rhetorical question for you, Marty. Okay?
Okay.
If you could save one whiskey that went up in a fire, which one would it be?
If I had to save one whiskey, I'll tell you what. I'll just do it from here because it's too big a question. If I had to save any of these, Springbank. I would save my Springbank. I love this. This is fabulous stuff.
Right. Okay. Right. All right. Marty, you're being asked, John G. Donnelly, what are you doing at Belfast Whisky Week? Give them in 30 seconds. Give them what you're doing there, and we'll do it closer to the time as well.
Yeah, I might be doing a very long introduction to Irish whiskey.
Okay, very good. Okay, so that'll be a good opener for the show, for the event. Frank, I've been told, not that I would know, but apparently they used to fire test the purity of poaching. The cleaner the flame, the purer the poaching. So I'm told. Is that true? Yeah. Yeah.
Apparently they used to do it where it had to have a blue flame, and if it sputtered, it meant there was other impurities in it. This, just stick with this stuff, okay? Just don't bother. If somebody offers you a bottle of poaching at £6 for a litre or something, just say no, thank you. Go buy that.
You don't want to get alcohol poisoning. Here, listen. I thought we'd get that big role in Hollywood because all I read was Paul and Farrell here. There it goes. Is he has a big role? There you go. You've a big role, right? There you go. And Connor is saying, as a Meath man, I can tell you that actually did happen. And I imagine that's the drinking in the Dublin. Now, we've got 1 minute to recap. We've got to say all about what's happening next week. What do people need to do?
Next week, you've got to, between now and Monday morning, you have to like and share this post, this video. And then we'll be picking people at random. I'll get Jarlath to send out bottles, and then if anybody wants to join in, who unfortunately wasn't lucky enough, and you'll find out on Monday evening whether you've been lucky enough to get one. If you want to join in anyway, go and buy a bottle of 3 Crowns from the distillery, and you can join in, and we'll be doing tasting notes and all this kind of stuff, and having a bit of laugh and seeing what people think. Okay,
excellent stuff. That's another fantastic week. You learn a lot about fire and its role in whiskey at the beginning, the middle, and the end. And that is the end of our show tonight. Thank you very much, Marty, for putting that all together for us. It's been a fantastic topic this week of fire. Speak to you again, same time, same place. Well, lots of different places, but next week.
Bye-bye, folks. Take care.